G'day, welcome to Nevadia. How are you going, everyone? A few weeks ago, Braxton Hunter, a Christian apologist, put out a video asking questions aimed at atheists. A quick YouTube search will find multiple people responding to these 10 questions. A few of these are personal friends of mine, such as Prophet of Zod, Shannon Q, Vice Rhino, a fellow Aussie friend of mine, Vagrant Sam, who you should all subscribe to, and an epic 5-part series by Jeff Cooper responding to all of these questions. If you're hoping this is my response, I'm really sorry to disappoint you because, let's be honest, it's a waste of time if so many other people have done it before me. Instead, I'm going to ask some questions for Christians. I got some help from my Twitter followers because, hey, they need some questions answered too. However, just like so many lists of questions that are aimed at atheists, I honestly don't think Christians can answer these. Number 1, do you think God made Earth twice in 6 days? In Genesis, the creation sequence is described twice and the order is different in both accounts. Does that mean that the Earth was made twice? Number 2, if Jesus is God and God is perfect, was Jesus really saying, I want to throw stones at that woman in John 8:7? Number 3, if Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were written by Moses, how does he know what happened at a time before he lived and what happened at his wake? I mean, was he there? Number 4, if Jesus was such a good guy, why was he so against people earning money? Number 5, can God create time and not create time while at the same time being outside of time? Number 6, why don't Christians like metal when chanting in a dead language under the statue of a dead guy is probably the most metal thing I can think of? Number 7, they say that Jesus could walk on water. That's brilliant, but wouldn't that be a problem if he needed to go under the water to save a drowning man? Wouldn't it be better for him to be a really strong swimmer? Number 8, what is the Krebs cycle? I mean, it's been explained to me 700 times, but it still does not make sense. And if I can't understand it, I doubt any Christian could. Why are men? Number 10, when Jesus turned water into wine, did God heal the inebriated? Number 11, if you are a Christian, then why do you deny the existence of Thanatos? Number 12, if you really are a Christian, explain why is it that fig trees change when a child eats an apple and dances the tango? Number 13, if God loved the world so much, why did he make cheese so delicious and then create some people with lactose intolerance? Number 14, if God exists, why does my foot itch? Ugh. Number 15, why does bacon taste so good if ham is supposed to be cursed? Number 16, we have paternity tests, but not maternity tests. This seems so unfair, but also irrelevant. The real question is, why does no one test the delivery stalk? Number 17, when Jesus walked along the road, why did his footsteps sound purple? Number 18, if bishops come from priests, then why do we still have priests? Number 19, if Hosea leaves Egypt on a donkey, travelling 55 kilometres per hour at the same time Friday as Mary leaves Nazareth on the donkey, travelling 60 kilometres per hour, where will they meet if they meet 3 days later on a Sunday? Number 20, if you took 100 billion neutrinos, divided that by pi, and then multiplied by the Schwarzschild radius of Saturn, then divided it by 643, how long would you be? Okay, so what are the points of these questions? They make literally no sense. Precisely. And that's because those gotcha questions that are aimed at atheists generally make no sense and come under several categories. One category is that they don't ask questions pertaining to the stance of, I don't believe in the existence of a God. Often atheists are asked things like, if atheism is real, then how can you explain life? This has literally nothing to do with atheism. That's to do with biology, chemistry, and physics. The leading hypothesis is abiogenesis, but there's a few people floating around the panspermia hypothesis. An atheist is not, and I repeat, not a biologist, chemist, or physicist. Asking an atheist to answer a question that even the best scientists don't know the answer to is dishonest and clearly a gotcha. Would you ask a mechanic to describe the intricacies of the heart's electrical system without any form of formal education? No. Demanding an atheist to answer questions about high-level evolution or the origins of the universe is just as disingenuous. So I repeat again, atheists are not scientists. Some scientists are atheists, but atheists are not scientists. The equivalent question in my series is the Krebs cycle question. Often atheists are asked a highly complicated question about science, and usually there's an appeal to incredulity, logical fallacy. They imply that no atheist can answer this highly complicated and scientific question, where in fact, atheists that are experts in that particular field can. I have no doubt that there are Christians out there that are more than capable of understanding and explaining the Krebs cycle. Another type of disingenuous form of questions that no atheist can answer falls under the category makes sense until it really doesn't. These questions often seem like a good question until you think about them for about 3 seconds and then suddenly they make no sense. These tend to be the more philosophical questions like, if you are an atheist, how can you explain free will? Sounds perfectly reasonable until you think about neurology. It is a major question in neuroscience and psychology, but from what I understand that the concept of free will is slowly being rejected. One argument against free will is the change in personality when a person has a brain injury. The existence of congenital neurological disorders such as autism and ADHD can also be used as arguments against free will. People with ASPD or antisocial personality disorder have different structures in certain areas of the brain, such as reduced connections between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for empathy and guilt. They also have less activity in the amygdala, which mediates fear and anxiety. If physical structures within the brain can cause personality deviations, then you really need to ask if free will truly exists. And personally, I don't think so. Let's say you prefer philosophy to science here. If everything you experience during your formative years is set and controlled by a birth that you didn't choose to people that you had no influence over prior, then can you say that the lessons you learn are truly in your control? Is it possible to force yourself to truly believe that the sky is green when in fact you see blue? Can you make a decision from information or experiences you don't have? Even if that information is someone else's experience relayed to you through text or through conversation, you still experience that relay of information. Thereby, it's still an experience. How can free will exist independent of experience? As far as I can tell, it can't. And no matter how much your brain screams at you green, you cannot force your eyes to stop seeing blue. Another example of temporary sense is if God doesn't exist, then why is nature so beautiful? The appeal to beauty argument is so easily debunked by the numerous hideous species on this planet, such as the stonefish or the cane toad. Beauty, of course, is in the eye of the beholder. Some people might find peacocks absolutely horrible to look at because they hate the colour blue, whereas I find them incredibly beautiful. The equivalent in my series of questions is, do you think God made the earth twice in 6 days? It sounds pretty reasonable for about 3 seconds before you think about the very easily explained reason why there's multiple versions of the Genesis story. There were 2 versions of Genesis, one from Israel and one from Judea, and when the 2 kingdoms united, they were combined. It's a pretty simple explanation. It, like the question of free will, is not that great if you want to back your interlocutor into a corner, and neither of them are honest questions. The next class of questions aimed at atheists are the ones that generally oversimplify a complex topic in such a way that it's misrepresented. Usually these are the ones that ask about evolution, which, again, is not atheism, but biology. Questions like, if evolution is true, how did the heart evolve when the animal had no blood? I did a 3-ish minute explanation on the evolution of the vascular system here on Paulogia's channel. The question is asked at the 5-minute and 44-ish second mark. I am not an evolutionary biologist, but after about a day of searching and deciphering that paper I found, I was able to answer that question. In my series of questions, the equivalent is, if Jesus was such a good guy, why was he so against people earning money? Jesus wasn't against people earning money, but he was against the obscene accumulation of money by the few. He warned against the love of money, but not of money itself. My question is disingenuous, and if you are completely uneducated in Christianity, it poisons the well against the message of Jesus. The same thing applies to anyone asking questions like, if atheism is real, then why? Insert random something that has nothing to do with atheism. Another question category that I have noticed is the incomplete question. It's often badly framed, and the question generally goes for about 3 minutes before you realise the person hasn't actually finished their question. It often starts along the lines of, atheists can't explain how Adam and Eve, and then they go on and talk about the story of Genesis without actually saying what atheists can't explain. Thankfully, this is a rare type of question that new apologists tend to ask. A small tip. If you want someone to answer a question, then perhaps ask a question. I mean, that usually helps. The equivalent in my questions is the why are men, and that leads to my last grouping of questions often asked of atheists. They're the ones that make literally no sense. They use philosophical jargon to confuse the average person. They misrepresent an argument so badly the question requires several light years worth of logical leaps to get to the conclusion. And that is what I see most often when I see these questions for atheists video. It's the non-parody version of, if a snake slithers in the night and no one is around to hear it, do I still have toast in my refrigerator? Unfortunately, these questions seem to be the most common because they do back atheists into a corner. Because they are so hard to understand or even respond to. How are you supposed to reply to a serious question that asks the equivalent of, can you eat an abomination mornay instead of a lobster mornay on a Sunday, and would that make both Jesus and Vishnu happy? You really can't, but you might be able to if you think about it. And this leads to my next issue with these questions. It often starts off with a premise of atheists can't answer these. People who don't really care about an atheist's opinion will never look at the response videos. They just take the word of the person they follow as truth and come away with the belief that atheists are dumb and can't answer questions because God is the only answer. But I have yet to find a legitimate, honest, and non-leading questions that has stumped an atheist. These question for atheist videos are generally around 5 minutes long, yet the person answering these questions may end up spending half an hour to an hour answering it. And who is going to want to sit through that? In the case of Jeff Cooper's response videos to Braxton, he's broken them up into 5 videos and the accumulated response time is over an hour. Braxton's original video was 6 minutes. Jeff told me that he has written over 11,000 words for Braxton. That's 44 pages for those of you who haven't done a lot of writing lately. That's longer than most short stories. This script is 5 pages for a quick comparison. So please go and watch all of them and give him a subscription because he definitely deserves it. Another issue is that questions are often just regurgitated or reframed versions of the same questions that have been asked 1,000 times before. Some are more elegantly posed, but if you strip away the language, you literally have the same question asked by a guy with a whiteboard, terrible camera angle, who may or may not reference ancient aliens as a source of accurate information, and who keeps calling all atheists dumb as his main argument. I may or may not be referring to someone. You know, I really wish these clickbait questions would just stop. They're old. They've been done to death 100 times over. It's a waste of time and they're only around to talk past the supposed people you're asking just to convince your followers who are already in your corner. Cliche as it is, preaching to the choir is apt here. They require next to no preparation, quick to make, and often intellectually and creatively lazy. It took me about 10 minutes to think up about 5 of my 20 questions and probably took more time trying to choose which questions from the Twitter thread that I was going to use. In comparison, the rest of the script took me hours to write. Normally I do a call to action, but in this case, I really don't have one. I could ask atheists to stop responding to them, but that is often their bread and butter for these types of channels. I know the people asking these questions will never stop. It gives them attention and it's also often their channel's bread and butter. It's a self-fulfilling cycle. And let's be honest, sometimes the cringe is just so beautiful. Will I ever respond to these questions for atheist videos? Probably not. Unless they ask a lot of science-based questions, I will let other people who know theology and philosophy much better than I do to answer those questions while I talk about science and advocate for a better understanding. And on that note, don't forget, don't give yourself the raw prawn. A huge thank you to my wonderful patrons, especially my $10 Redback Spider patrons, Ada Thirlball, Lauren Hart, and Ross Devereux. A special thank you to my $20 Platypus patron, Paul Butler, and of course, my $50 Death Adder patron, Zolfner. These questions asked to catch atheists truly are pointless, and I hope in the future they stop. But honestly, I cannot see that happening. Stay safe, everyone.